Well, good morning. As you all know, today is the last day of the 2025 legislative session. It has been an historic session in many ways. This marked our 100th legislative session. It also the first time that we had a succession for a new governor in the middle of the legislative session. And we've accomplished a great deal to keep South Dakota strong, safe, and free. The first bill I signed was Senate Bill 7, which bans sanctuary cities in South Dakota. This was a strong act of support for what President Trump is doing nationally to protect us from unlawful and uncontrolled illegal immigration. I also signed pro-life and Second Amendment-friendly bills. Additionally, I addressed the burden of rising property taxes for South Dakota homeowners with Senate Bill 216. This bill passed both House and Senate earlier this week, and I believe that 216 is a huge win for South Dakota homeowners, and I'm grateful for the support it received from the legislature. I'm confident that this bill will relieve some of the burden, and it will certainly slow down any future tax increases. We also delivered the 136th consecutive balanced budget for the state of South Dakota. And this year we took a look at and made some tough decisions. We made more than $70 million cuts to executive branch agencies to achieve a balanced budget. The truth be told, every one of those cuts were recommended by the governor's office. None of the cuts that were adopted were from legislative proposal. But we heard a lot of legislators say that we need to cut spending in order to deliver property tax relief. Well, I've worked on this issue for many years, and so I've come to understand our property tax system. And I thought today would be a good day to maybe educate some of the South Dakotans on how our property tax system works. So in the form of Property Tax 101, I'd start out by asking you all a question. How much of our states does our state collect in property tax dollars? Anybody have a guess?
For the state.
For the state.
Yeah.
You're right. $0.00 of property tax go to the state. State government does not collect a penny in taxes. It was a while back, I was talking to a fellow, he was the president of one of the major trade organizations in South Dakota. And he was talking about the issues with property tax. And I asked him that. And he made a guess. I said, look, $0. Nothing goes to the state. And his response to me was, well, that's a bunch of bullshit. Well, first I resisted the urge to smack him, and then explained to him why it was zero and how it got that way, and kind of some of the finer details of a property tax system. So if the money doesn't go to the state, where does it actually go? More than half of the property tax dollars goes to schools, 56% to be exact. More than a quarter goes to the counties, just 27%, and 13% goes to the cities. So that brings up the question, how do you reduce property taxes? Well, you have to do one of three things to reduce property taxes. Number one, you can reduce the need, which means cutting spending. If you want to cut those property taxes, you have to cut schools' budgets. And there's never been much desire to do that in the capital. And you could cut budgets, which means cuts to county roads, public safety and the like. Also, not much appetite for doing anything like that. Number two, you can shift the burden to another class of property. We've heard a lot about shift. Theoretically, you could do this on purpose. And once again, there hasn't been desire to do that in the capital for obvious reasons. And number three, you can find an alternative funding source. That third option is what I want to talk with you about a little bit today. Today, we celebrated the signing of Senate Bill 216. but there's more to do. And I want to emphasize this. We have not done anything with our efforts to bring property tax relief to some areas to South Dakota. We need to deliver meaningful property tax relief and actual property tax cuts for South Dakotans. And we need to find a way to do it without making the state or counties or school districts go broke. The legislature has formed a property tax relief task force through House Concurrent Resolution 6003 that will be working on the issue over the summer. And I and my team have been working recently on an idea to propose to that group. The idea came up fairly late in session, and I felt that it was better that we not try and introduce it during session, but take our time and get some of the finer details worked out before we present that to the committee. My plan is to offer a proposal to them as an option to how to reduce property taxes in a meaningful way and a targeted way. And I'm sure we'll hear more ideas come out of that task force as they move forward. I welcome more ideas, more imagination, and more creative problem solving. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Josh with Searchlight. One of the things on there, that, under the alternative funding I didn't see was economic development. Representative Mortensen kind of gave a speech about that. How do you think that falls into this?
I don't think I follow your question.
The idea that, say, you bring in a large business and then that's a new property you can tax, and really leaning into economic development to alleviate this property tax burden by spreading,
Certainly through property tax dollars to the education system through property taxes. Well, that's always a huge consideration. I remember when Keystone XL was slated to go through, and just the amount of revenue, other revenue through the pumping stations, for example, was dramatic and would have dramatic effect on education and providing more opportunity for counties and for education. So by all means, we're always looking for the next opportunity for South Dakota. A big part of our foundation of our administration.
Joe Sneevy, Dakota Scout. What is the proposal you're going to suggest?
Well, like I said, we're going to announce that at some point in the future. We're not far enough along in the process that we want to give details of that, because we still need to do our due diligence research, working through Jim and his office, the Department of Revenue, to get the numbers right and kind of put some finer touches on this before we present it to that committee.
Is it one of the three options that you laid out, whether that be cuts, shifts, more revenues, or a combination? Is it one of the three or a combination of them?
It would be the third option, to find an alternative funding source and something that's viable, something that goes to the heart of the need in the areas, understanding that, the vast majority of our counties have not had issues or huge issues with owner-occupied taxes. So it's a fairly targeted group. And again, I talked about a rifle shot solution rather than a shotgun solution. And that was a problem with a lot of the legislation that failed and that I couldn't have supported because it was affecting the entire state. I don't think people realize just how bad some of the legislation was. The one proposal that went back to 2020, that would have been a huge tax shift, and we would have been shifting taxes from the few counties that had the issue onto every county in the state. So property taxes for the vast majority of the landmass of South Dakota, the taxes would have went up as a result of that legislation. So there's a lot of things to be considered when you're dealing with property taxes. So many moving parts within the formula that you don't even consider, that it gets pretty easy to get lost in the weeds. And one of the reasons we're holding off until we have a lot of that better in focus for ourselves before we release it to that committee.
When I hear, Lee Strubendrath, CPB, when I hear new revenue or alternative revenue, I think taxes are an increase in taxes or a new taxing source. What's on the table here?
Could be. But yeah, I think there's, there are a lot of different things we're considering right now, but, I think we want to present a bill that gives individual counties options, and that's what's important. If you believe in local control, and especially if you can come up with a concept and then lay it out for people as an option, and then they make decisions based on what's best for their counties. And so that's the concept we're working toward.
Is there any, well, the task force won't be finished with its work till the end of the summer, probably, right? Would you consider maybe they're going to come back for prison in July? Could this also be part of a special session?
Yeah, I'll consider anything. Everything's on the table. Hypothetically, they could, if they saw something and loved it and came to an agreement on veto day, we could, that's a total hypothetical, and I won't comment on that any further. But yeah, options are on the table. In a special session, we're going to have another special session on prisons, and there's all kinds of different scenarios that might happen.
Dominic Dash with Argus Leader. In the vein of vetoes, is there anything that you have on the table that you're looking at possibly to veto at this point? Any further vetoes?
We still have, I think there's roughly 70 bills left for me to sign, and we'll be going through them one at a time. So I won't comment as far as whether or not I know that there's going to be any vetoes in there or not. But right now, we're going to go through them one at a time and make that decision.
Have you, Grant Green with Dakota News Now, have you gotten a chance to review Representative Elwood's bill that would allow employees that work for city and county governments to be able to carry guns in bars that are within those jurisdictions? And what do you think about it?
I have not reviewed that bill at this time.
Without going into too much detail, I'm wondering if you could confirm if this is along the vein of where you're going with the property tax relief. Sales taxes for counties, or letting counties get their hand in some of the sales tax, is that potentially what you're looking at, or would we rule that off the list?
Repeat the question for me, please.
Like cities, how they're able to get sales taxes, some of that sales tax revenue is what you guys are looking at, have anything to do with potentially letting counties get some of that sales tax revenue? I know that that's something that they have said they would like.
Yeah, I don't think we're working in that direction, if I understand the question right.
The county sales tax isn't what you're pushing for.
Well, that's an option. That's one thing we're, part of the conversations.
I had previously had a chance to talk with Minnehaha, the director of equalization office, and he was a little upset. He felt like he has said that lawmakers have not come to him and reached out about some options when it comes to property tax. And so moving forward, do you think or I should say, with this last legislative session, do you think that maybe the property tax issue was a little rushed and there were more conversations that could have been had?
No, I don't believe that. I've been involved in this legislative process for over 20 years, and we have a good process, and it's very transparent. And we're one of only a handful of states that require that every bill constitutionally is required to get a public hearing. And so it's a fairly long process. It's and as transparent as it ever has been in the history of the planet. With technology, these bills get posted almost in real time in the results and the requirements that are posted in committee 24 to 48 hours ahead of time. It's a very transparent process. And also just the communication that's with social media now that you add into it. To say that somebody said it was rushed through the session. We had these discussions. We started these discussions the first week of session, or the first week I became governor. I guess that would have been the third week of session. And so to say that it was rushed through or somebody didn't talk to them, I don't really put a lot of credibility with that.
We're going to go to the phones for a few questions. Hearing no questions, we'll come back to the room.
Governor Bob Mercer with Teleland News. What is the timetable for revealing your plan, your proposal to the tax group?
Well, it's a good question. We've been so focused at just getting through session that really haven't talked about that. It came up very late in session, and like I said, when we first started talking about it, there was conversation about trying to pound something through at this late stage in the game. But it goes back to your question about the process and rushing it through. That would have been rushing it through. And we would have had to circumvent a lot of the process that normally would have taken place as far as committee hearings and testimony, public testimony. So that was why we decided just to make an announcement that we're working on this, and we haven't set a time as far as when we'll release this to the task force.
But would it be?
I'd say days, not weeks.
Days from now?
Days from now, maybe a week. I don't know, Bob. But we'll continue to have our conversations and as soon as we get the information in front of us, I don't know why I think we want to give that task force as early a start as we can to start looking it over and, figuring out if they want to tweak it or not.
And then speaking of the task force, do you plan to the task force has a seat on there for either you or the lieutenant governor or your designee. Do you plan to participate or have your lieutenant governor participate?
Well, I think I've kind of made up my mind that I want to, the former legislator from my district, who was invaluable to me through the years when we did property tax reform on ag taxes, Kirk Chafee was the director of equalization in Meade County. And he was a huge asset to me getting that. That was some heavy lifting going to a new system for taxes. And he was such a valuable asset to me, and he knows the property tax system better than anyone. In fact, I solicited his help when I was working on the concept that was contained in 216. And so I probably should have talked to Kirk before I announced at a press conference that he's my guy, but I'm going to see if I can twist his arm and talk him into doing it. Yep. Give me a call, Kirk.
Sessions in the books. Obviously, you mentioned that your tenure as governor happened in the middle of a session. It's the first time we've seen that in our state. Your predecessor's agenda, it was her budget. There was, how do you think that went? We saw some setbacks with the prison, which was her ambition, about school education savings accounts. I don't know. I didn't make a list, but how do you think it went?
Well, I think all in all, there were the hiccups. Obviously the prison, I would have liked a better outcome on that. But we're pretty good shape for the shape we're in, I think. We had a lot of successes, and at the end of the day, we had our 136th balanced budget. The appropriators actually got their job done sooner than I think I ever recall in my 20-some years down here. They had the budget on the table day before yesterday. And there's Matt Michaels in the room. I don't recall that ever happening in our tenure down here. So all in all, it was a pretty good session.
I wanted to ask, of course, about the first bill you vetoed. There seems to be a lot of disappointment. Of course, continued concerns about the situation of childcare. What do you think, like, as far as the options currently available to South Dakotans is best in order to relieve the issue of shortages within employment and childcare?
Well, I think there were two things at play with the child care program. It was to help the low income receive some assistance in paying for their child care. And I think the biggest issue was the fact that this bill would have diluted that, and it would have dedicated money to a group that was 300% of poverty rather than the current group. And so that was one issue. Second, I think the Department of Social Services has taken many steps to expand and to help the child care industry, and I think this doesn't take that into consideration. And there were some comments that were kind of unfortunate. But Laura's here. Maybe you'd talk about your work with the child care system.
Absolutely. As the governor said, the bill that came forward wasn't the right solution for us. We look forward to continuing work with Representative Healy and Senator Reed, who's put together a stakeholder task force that's been going on for the last year. We'll continue through that this year, and we'll be looking for solutions that include economic development as well as solutions that involve the private sector coming to the table. They have a report out, and that's really our starting point for the next round of conversations at what those solutions would be. Can you say your name and title for everyone? Yep, Laura Ringling, I'm the governor's senior policy advisor.
We have time for 2 more questions here.
Getting kind of back to maybe the property tax task force as they look ahead, a lot of folks bringing that bill, at least from the House, talk a lot about the problem being spending by these taxing districts. I know it's hard to really kind of generalize, especially when counties are going through different things, but do you think that these taxing districts like counties and education are overspending right now?
Well, I won't say that they're overspending. I don't know. I'm sure there's some, but I think there's always room for improvement. And I think too often with some of the local taxing districts, like i.e. the counties, the cities, fire districts, what have you, that's never a consideration. And we saw it this year that they come to the state and they want the state to solve their issues by coming up with a funding source that's coming from the state. And that's why, in my opening comments, I talked about what their resources are. The property taxes were designed and created to fund the local governments, i.e. the cities and the counties. And so when we're looking for a solution to solve some of their problems, and then they're asking for a state solution, that's when I kind of get a little tight-jawed about not including in that conversation finding more efficiencies in local governments rather than coming to the state. Additional funding should be the last resource, not the first.
Last question here.
All right.
Governor, on the prison plan, the task force is going to meet here in a few weeks. And do you have an agenda for them yet?
I don't. In fact, Tony Ben Heisen, Lieutenant Governor, just met with that group yesterday, and Tony and I our paths haven't crossed much in the last 24 hours, but I've yet to sit down and get a briefing from him. But he met with the legislators going to be on that task force just to kind of have a visit with them to figure that out prior to their first meeting and prior to everybody leaving the session. So he's up in in the Senate right now. Otherwise, he'd have been here and he could have answered that question for you.
Great,
Thank
thank
you
you
all.
all.